as well as being internationally published best-selling author of the middle grade adventure series, the Mapmaker Chronicles, which I have here, and the Ateban Cipher, which I have not read yet, but I have here. She's also written non-fiction, written for newspapers and magazines, as well as online publishing and blogs. Alison is the joint administrator of the wonderful online community Your Kids Next Read on Facebook, which I joined myself early this year and am loving it. So I highly recommend people get on there. And she's also the co-host of the So You Want to Be a Writer podcast. Alison's newest offering to the literary world is her new novel for readers aged 12 and up, The Firestar, and was published last week on the 1st of September. So congratulations, Alison. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we're looking forward to having you introduce us to your new book today. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to throw over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much. What a lovely intro. And thanks, guys, for coming along. I feel like this is such an intimate group. I feel like we should be sitting around with our cups of tea, just doing a Q&A sort of thing. But what I thought I would do is just give you a bit of an idea about the Firestar, where the idea for it came from, how I kind of went about writing it, and a little bit about some of the other things that I do as well. And then, throw open for questions. I'm hoping you'll have some questions. If you don't have questions, then I'm going to make you sit there and listen to me read the book, okay? So prepare yourselves for that as well. But, yeah, obviously, so I'm here today. My name is Alison Tate. I'm also known as A.L Tait, which is my secret, not very secret writing name, as I tell the kids when I go to school visits. And they're all like, what's A.L? And I'm like, well, it's Al. It's actually just A.L Tait with dots in it, which is what my Twitter handle is, and that's how I came up with my secret, not very secret writing name. But I am the author of the Mapmaker Chronicles and the Ateban Cipher series, are my first two books, my first two series for kids. And of course, my new book, which is, I'm going to hold it up here for your pleasure, which is The Firestar, and it's the first Maven and Reeve Mystery. I'm actually working on the second Maven and Reeve Mystery as we speak, so there will be a second book out in 2021 as well. So yes, I am an author. I'm also a teacher of creative writing. I do tutoring and also create courses for the Australian Writers Centre. I am the co-host, admin of the Your Kids Next Read group, which is, I work with the other author, Alison. She is also a middle grade author, and also the fabulous celebrity teacher librarian, Megan Daly, author of Raising Readers. And we run that group together. I co-host the So You Want to Be a Writer podcast with my partner in crime, Valerie Koo. And we have been actually putting that podcast together now for about 4 years. We have 350 episodes or thereabouts of that podcast. So if you are someone who would like to be a writer, I definitely recommend having a listen to that. There's an awful lot of great stuff in that. And in my other life, I'm also, a mother of two boys. I run a family. I have a border collie named Procrasti Pup. I live on the south coast of New South Wales, and I keep myself pretty busy with all of the things, as we said before. So The Firestar, which is my new book, came out on the 1st of September. It's been very well received. The reviews I'm getting are incredibly exciting. Launching a book is a very strange feeling because there's so much build up, and then the book comes out and you feel like there should be a parade past your house and, trombones and balloons and the whole bit. And it's not like that at all. It's just like it goes out there and you cross your fingers and hope for the best, which is what I'm doing with the Maven and Reeve series. So The Firestar, it's the first book in the Maven and Reeve mystery series, and it's about Maven, who is a maid, and Reeve, who is a squire. They're both about 16. Maven's 15 and Reeve is 16. They meet at Renart Castle. They both arrive there on the same day. They've never met before. They arrive at Renart Castle for different reasons and with different ideas in mind. They both have big dreams, which are not necessarily, going to match very well. but within sort of like moments of them arriving at the castle, the Firestar, which is a dazzling jewel of, you know, incalculable value, goes missing. And because they are the last two in the door, they are the first to be suspected. And if they are going to clear their names, they have to find the Firestar. Now, they have a 3-day deadline to do this. There is a wedding involved, a lovely big royal wedding, but a noble wedding, which is quite exciting. I do love a good wedding. So there's a whole lot of, you know, intrigue going on in the background, a whole lot of politics. There's a bit of a rebellion stirring in the kingdom of Cartref. And so, like, on one level, this is a story about two teenagers who meet and have to go and solve a mystery, and sort of find friendship and you know, other sort of life experiences along the way. So that's one level. On the other level, it's about rebellion, large and small. It's about secrets. There's a lot of secrets in this book, and it's also about how small decisions can lead to very big events, which is something that I think that the reading audience that this is aimed at, which is basically we're calling it upper middle grade. So your general middle grade audience is 8 to 12. This is more like a 10 to 14 sort of a read. So it's lower YA, upper middle grade. The sweet spot is about 12. And these are kids that are, you know, they're growing up. They're starting high school. They're having to navigate a new world because, as we all know, high school is quite different to primary school. They're having to find their way through friendship groups. There's always intrigue in the playground, am I right? There's always secrets. There's always rebellion. So they understand a lot of that stuff just on a sort of like experiential level. But then, of course, this is set in a medieval style world. So it's a big canvas for me to play with. And I like to call my books, I call them almost history, because they're inspired by that medieval setting, which I love. I really love that period of history. I think there's so much going on in it. So they're inspired by that, but then I create my own kingdoms and my own worlds within that sort of, with that as a foundation for my worlds. And all of my books are like that. All of my books are kind of almost history. The Mapmaker Chronicles is about a race to map the world before there were maps. And all of the mapping techniques used in that book are based on, you know, things that actual explorers did. But of course, my guys are going to places that that don't exactly exist on any map that we know about. And the Ateban Cipher is set within the kind of, starts out in a monastery. So it's set within that sort of world, that inspiration, but it's, again, a fantasy kingdom. And I had a question here from Becky, who said, where do you get the ideas for the names of all the people and places in your fantasy worlds? And I have to say that naming kingdoms is really hard. And I didn't actually realise how difficult it was going to be until I started doing it with the Mapmaker Chronicles. But what I do is I try to come up with a name. So again, I'm looking at a medieval kind of a setting, and I try to come up with a name that is resonant with what that kingdom is actually like. So the best example I can actually give of it is in the Mapmaker Chronicles, where Quinn, our hero, comes from the kingdom of Verdania, and it comes from the word verdant because this is a green and pleasant land. Like, this is a really lovely spot. So I look for those sort of those root words, and then I sort of bounce off with those. And obviously the Cartref in the Firestar, it's a not quite England, not quite Ireland, Middle Ages sort of a world. So I kind of was looking for words that fit the feeling of that book. And sometimes I'll name a kingdom a few times before I get it right. And city names or town names are the same. Naming characters is slightly different because I look for a word that means one of the main characteristics of that particular character. So Reeve is a very old-fashioned word for sheriff. And when I first started writing the Firestar, it was an interesting one for me to write because I started with him. And I think I started with him mostly because with the Mapmaker Chronicles, it's written from a male protagonist point of view, third person, and I wrote that one, you know, for my boys. I have two sons who are 16 and 13, and I was inspired by the kinds of things that they like to read. So I started out with that sort of character for them. And I think in some ways Quinn was a little bit of one son and a little bit of another son and a little bit of this person, and like there was a whole range of things. And that's what you do with characters. You put a whole lot of characteristics into them of people that you know, but then they become their own person as well. When I was, so Reeve was sheriff, and so I started out thinking that he was going to be the main detective in this particular mystery series. I sort of had this idea that maybe it would be like a Sherlock Holmesy, Watson-y kind of thing, and he was going to be, you know, Holmes, and I began with him, sheriff. But then as I started writing the book, he met Maven, and our Maven means one who understands. And Maven, as soon as he met Maven, and I say met, and you know, people think I'm sound a little bit crazy when I talk like that, but he fully met her. She came wandering along a hallway, and he met her in this story. And I was like, okay, well, who are you? Because this is how I write stories. I come up with an idea and I start writing, and I sort of hope that it's going to work out. That's kind of how I operate. And I do not actually advocate for this as an efficient way to write a book, because it's a little bit hairy sometimes as to whether it's actually going to work out. So he met Maven, and I very, very quickly realised with Maven that she was nobody's Watson. She was not a sidekick. She was never going to be a sidekick. And I realised that in actual fact, the Holmesian character in this book was probably going to be her. And not only did she kind of shoulder her way to the front as this person who understands, but she brought with her a whole gang. So she is a member of the Beach Circle, which has a role to play in this book and also going forward into the series. And the Beach Circle is a secret network, underground network of women and girls who work together to kind of make their lives better, because the role of women in this particular society, as it was in, you know, sort of in the Middle Ages and medieval times, is very small. Like they have a very closed world. She wants more. So these women and girls all work together. So she's kind of shouldered her way down the hallway into the front of the story, and then also brought this whole like team with her, which was quite interesting for me as an author. Because when I got the idea for the story, and Joanne has asked the question about, you know, where did the idea come from? And I set out to write a mystery. Like I wanted to write a mystery. I love mystery stories. It's what I read as a kid. It's what I go to now. I read a lot of crime fiction, and all of my series have had a mystery element to them. Like there's always a kind of an underlying mystery in both the Mapmaker Chronicles and the Ateban Cipher novels. But this one is a dead set detective story. Like I wanted to set up a mystery, and I wanted it to be, you know, red herrings and solve the crime and all of that kind of stuff. So I set out to write this mystery story, which is where the idea sort of came from. I set out to write it with Reeve as the main character. As I said, Maven turned up. So then I had this real drama because I realised I'd sort of started writing the story all from his perspective. And then I realised that her perspective was equally as important. And how was I going to manage that? So I had to rewrite the whole thing from the start, being sort of so that it was from both perspectives. So I started out by writing them both in third person. So if you know, it's like Reeve did this, you know, Maven said that sort of stuff. And it wasn't working for me at all. I couldn't make it work because I was just going, Reeve said this, Maven did that, and I was swapping them around like that. And it was kind of like, she's not really working. So then I decided that I'd write the whole thing from Maven's perspective, and it was all going to be first person. So I rewrote the whole 20,000 words like that. And then that didn't work either because her world is so closed. And when you're in first person, when it's I did this and I did that, the only thing you can show the reader or tell the reader is what that character knows. And because her world was so small, so much smaller, that didn't work either. So then I had to rewrite the whole thing again. And this is why I say, please don't write books like I write, because it's incredibly inefficient. With Reeve in third person and Maven's sections in first person. And it's one of the things that lots of people have commented on when they've reviewed the book, is this switch from in the points of view, and how unusual it is, particularly in a middle grade book. But it was the only way to make it work. And I think it works really well because when we read Maven's bits, we are in Maven's shoes. It's really intimate, as reflective of her world. But Reeve, he's a man about town. He's socially skilled. He's got, he understands how the world works. He's out there doing it. And so his sections are third person. And I think that it's what, as I said, it is one of the points of difference, I think, about this book is that switch in the points of view. But back to the inspiration. So the idea was that I wanted to write a mystery story. So the stories come from that. It's come from sort of subconscious preoccupations, I guess, that I've had over the last couple of years about, the education of girls and women, the role of girls in literature, particularly in that middle grade sort of field, because there's been a lot of discussion, and I see this. This is, I guess, where Your Kids Next Read feeds into my sort of thought process too, because I see what people are asking for, and there's a lot of conversation in there about, wanting, strong female characters. And my approach to that has always been, I've never sort of thought about books for boys, books for girls. The Mapmaker Chronicles and the Ateban Cipher, I mean, I go to speak in boys' schools a lot because of those books, because, they're adventure stories and they're big picture. But both of those stories have very strong female characters in them. And my approach to female characters has always been to put really excellent girl characters into books that both boys and girls will read, because I think that that's the best way to make sure boys get that dose that they need sometimes, that they're not always the smartest person in the room. And I think that that's probably something that all of my heroes have in common, is that they understand that and they are happy to work with that. And I think that that's quite an important thing. Again, that just comes from my own preoccupations. But the other thing that inspired this particular story, the Firestar, and this particular world, and particularly I think the Beach Circle, was a newspaper article that I saw in about 2017. And this is something that you do as a writer. You're always, you're like I'm like a bowerbird. I guess I'm out there looking for the blue things, the things that pop for me. And this article was about a farmer in England, in Shropshire, and he kind of fell into a bit of a rabbit hole in his field when he was doing his work one day, and he discovered this was not a rabbit hole. He went right down that rabbit hole, and underneath there was a whole network of like underground chambers. And like one of these chambers was still set up with a table and chairs and the whole bit in it, under the ground in this field, perfectly preserved thing. And they think it was probably used by the Knights Templar back in the Middle Ages. So it's like a secret society. And I saw that article, and then there was also a news article, documentary sort of thing about it online that I saw. And I was just like, oh, that's amazing. That just fired every bit of my imagination and my creative instincts. Was an underground, room that's carved, and it was amazing. And so, of course, when I was writing the Firestar, and you don't necessarily even consciously do this, when I was writing the Firestar, out that came, and the Beach Circle meets in this room, and it's an underground, chamber down a rabbit hole, and it was inspired by that. So the inspiration for stories comes from lots of different places. I really enjoy books and TV series about, the French Resistance and the Underground Railroad in the US. That kind of secret society working to kind of make things better for people. I really love the idea of that, and I think it came from that as well. So I think, secret clubs, I don't know what you guys were like as kids, but I loved, the Secret Seven, the Famous Five. I wanted a clubhouse. I wanted a password. I wanted the Bob Whites in Trixie Belden had jackets that they wore. It was the Pink Ladies in Greece, like wherever, whatever. I just love the idea. They weren't real secret, admittedly, but still. I love the idea of this secret society that you can be part of, and this group of people that's there for each other. And I think as kids, we particularly are drawn to that, because we're often, particularly if you're a bookish nerd like I was, you're often sort of like looking for your people, and your people are not necessarily around you, but maybe they're in books, and that's that you can feel like you're part of that little group in that book. So all of these things fed together, and it came out as the Firestar. And Maven and Reeve, I think, as characters, the fact that they are so different, and they kind of like butt heads, and you know, Maven has no trouble whatsoever because Reeve is a very charming boy. He reminds me a lot of my youngest son, who is one of those guys who can walk into a room and light it up with a smile and how do you like me so far. So Reeve is a little bit that, and I think that you know, that and the sort of Maven is much more in the shadows. She's a lot more sort of, so she's an unusual girl for her time, and so she doesn't really fit in. And so they're a really interesting couple of characters. There's no romance there, just so you know, just in case anyone's worried. But there's always going to be that idea, because every time I write a book, and I'm writing for that 8 to 12 market with the other series, I will have little girls come up to me in grade 6 and say to me, "Are Quinn and Ash going to get together?" And I'm like, "No, she's too good for him. She's not going anywhere near him." But yeah, so there's the idea that maybe one day, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But kids appreciate that as much as anyone does, I think. So yeah, so that's the Firestar, the first book, A Maven Reeve Mystery, and it's pretty exciting that it's out there in the world. So does anyone have any questions? Because I think I've just babbled there for about 20 minutes.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Alison. Yeah, so if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute and ask your question, or if you'd prefer, you can type your question into the chat bar. I see a little comment in the chat bar from Sally for you, Alison. She
Oh,
said, I'm laughing. I'm not sure if you approve of the term pantser, but I'm in awe
yes.
of fiction writers who embark on their writing journeys without a map.
Yeah, no, that's me. I'm definitely a pantser, and it's an interesting way. I guess one thing that I get out of it though is that so people have said to me they've got to the end of the Firestar and nearly dropped the book when they found out, you know, who done it, so to speak. And so did I, because when I got to the end of writing the story, I was like, "Oh, what?" So there's as much surprise in it for me, I think, sometimes as there is for the reader, and that's one of the things that actually drives me forward with the story. I do outline a bit more than I used to. And I did actually try once, you know, writing the whole thing out before I started. But I got so bored. I already knew what was going to happen. And so it took me a really long time to finish writing that book because I knew the ending. So I have an idea of where the book is going. But then it often surprises me. But yes, pantsing, I am an absolutely unrepentant pantser.
Alison,
Yeah.
when you write, do you have a certain idea of character types and that you use those character types, or do you prefer to have the characters unique as opposed to putting them into a box?
Oh, look, I think when you're writing a certain type of book, like my books are, you know, they're a middle grade adventure fantasy thing. So there's a certain expectation from the readership of those books of some of the things that they're going to find in those books. And I think as an author, particularly if you read a lot across that sort of, if you read a lot in the area that you're going to be writing in, you almost subconsciously take that stuff on board. But I mean, the only thing that really probably, so Quinn in the Mapmaker Chronicles and Gabe in the Ateban Cipher are both reluctant heroes. Like there's no doubt about it. They are very definitely guys that would rather stay home. They don't want to have the great adventure. They really much rather someone else did it, if that's at all possible. If we could send someone else, that would be good. And I think that I wrote those books so that I really like that kind of character. I'm very much attracted to that kind of character myself. So I think that's the case. Um, but Reeve in the Firestar is quite a different guy. He's someone who has been on his own since he was 7 as a page in another sort of manner. He's had to learn how to manage himself and how to manage the world around him. So he's a lot more sort of savvy than my other characters have been. And he was a really interesting one for me to write from that perspective, because that level of confidence I wasn't kind of used to bringing out in my characters. But I think any character comes from the world that you put them in. You can start out with, I'm going to write a reluctant hero. All right, that's what this guy's going to be, which is not necessarily what I set out to write, but that's how it sort of developed. But say I'm going to write a reluctant hero. my reluctant hero will always be different to yours because I'm going to put him in a world of my own manufacture, and I'm going to bring all of my experience and my, reading and my inspirations to him, because the character of a book, they drive the story in the sense that every single decision, everything that happens in that plot of a story is driven by decisions that character makes and how they react to those decisions, how they react to things. And if they react in one way, it's going to send them this way. And if they react in another way, it's going to send them that way. And you and I could take the same character and write completely different stories about them, because you would have the character make different decisions to what I would. So I think that there's an expectation within a readership that there'll be a certain feeling to the book and a certain sort of like character. There's probably going to be a mentor. I mean, in the case of the Maven Reeve Mysteries, the mentor is actually a woman, which is kind of unusual in this kind of book, because mostly it's the older male, like you have in the Ranger's Apprentice or something like that, or in the Mapmaker Chronicles. So there's going to be those characters, those sort of archetypal characters, but they're going to always be different depending on what the voice of the writer is going to be like. Does that help? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
There's just a question. Sorry, Yvonne, you were on.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, I'm off mute now. There's a question here from Sally Jane again. How long did it take you to go through all of those point of view revisions, Alison?
Oh, good question. So this book has taken me a little while to write, because I started writing it and then I wrote something else, and then I came back to it and changed the point of view. But I would say overall, like the 20,000 words that I had written probably took me, because I was kind of keen on the book at that stage, so it probably took me about 4 or 5 weeks to kind of blast through those 20,000 words, and then each of those edits would have taken, probably a couple of weeks each, because you think it's a matter of changing the she's to I's and the, he's to whatever. But it's actually not, because you start to realise that as soon as you come back into that I perspective, you have to think about the voice of the character and the knowledge and experience of the character, and what does that character know and what don't they know and what can't they know, because they're not in the stables while so-and-so is having a conversation with so-and-so. So they're only ever going to hear about it via hearsay or something, which is a different experience to actually witnessing a conversation yourself. So it took a little while, and it took me a lot of, and this is what I would say if you're writing anything, is have a little group of writers around you that you trust, because I would write my bit and then I'd ship it out to a couple of friends and say, what do you reckon about this? And they would come back to me and say, no, that's terrible, Alison, you need to do that again, generally. Because also get friends who are going to be really honest with you, that what you don't want is someone who's going to say, oh, it's lovely, because that's not going to help you. So my friends are very honest. They will talk me down from the ceiling when I'm a little bit, hysterical, but they have no fear whatsoever of just going, you need to take 5,000 words off the start of this, Al, because you started in the wrong place, which is something that I do a lot. That was great. That was a good feeling. So it's, I can't remember what the question was, but that was cool.
How long did it take you to go
That's
through?
right. Yeah, so backwards and forwards, probably 6 months, I would say, but spread out over, more like a year to 18 months till I got the hang of it, basically.
There's another comment here from Jody. So interesting getting an insight into how you develop the story and develop the characters.
Thanks, Jody. You're seeing inside my brain in a way that you probably don't see when we have barbecues.
Yes, that's right.
which may or may not be a good thing.
So I imagine now that you've locked in sort of the point of view for the new series, then going into the second one is a bit more straightforward, because you know where you're headed.
It's interesting though, because I writing the second one, I'm now at about 50,000 words. I've probably got about 10,000 words to go. Technically 10,000 words to go at the moment. And what I've found is, I have a day in this book at the moment. And the first drafts for me are just a matter of me getting it out on the page and seeing what's going to happen. So at the moment I have a day that's about 56 hours long. There's so much going on this one day. that I'm going to have to go back and fix that. And the other thing that's been quite interesting about this book, which I'm going to have to fix in the second draft, is that this one, to the first book, was much more, in the first draft, was much more Reeve's perspective, that third person perspective, possibly because I was establishing the world. And then it was a matter of, when I did the second draft, I had to make sure that it was more even-handed. And that, you know, there was an equal amount of Maven's perspective, so changing things around a bit in different places to show the world through her perspective and not his. But this time around, what I'm finding is I've got so much more of her, possibly because of the storyline of this one. And Reeve is feeling a little bit sidelined at the moment, particularly in the first half of the book. So now this time around, I'm going to have to go back and, you know, insert more Reeve. And it's interesting, when I write my drafts, I actually put little brackets, insert more Reeve, or you need historical detail here, or go find out something about what they ate, or, you know, that sort of stuff. So I often, I'll have the big picture research in my mind, but little details, it's a matter of me putting those into the second draft.
Awesome. And do you have an idea of how many books might be in this new series yet?
Well, it's one of those ones, it's quite a good one in the sense that each story is a standalone. So each mystery will be solved within the book.
Okay.
So the one that I'm working on at the moment will be solved within book 2. But the backdrop that I have set up, the world that they live in, these turbulent times, are the kind of turbulent times that I could just like eke out for 20 books if I need to, or I can wrap up in 4. So
Yeah.
it will depend, I think, on how, you know, it always depends on how they go. And my lovely publishers at Puff and Penguin Random House, you know, I'm just really hoping that they want lots of them. So, you know, go out, tell all your friends so that they want more books.
I have a question for you, Alison. So because it's a series, so is it important that you read the first one in the series, or is it something that children can pick up, you know, the third or the second, and still be filled in with enough information?
I will always make sure that there's enough information that if they pick up the second book, because as I said, each mystery is self-contained. So it starts here, finishes here. Obviously, you're going to have like a lot more detailed backstory about, you know, the characters and the world if you start with book 1. But it's the kind of thing that, you know, you are going to know who these characters are by the end of the first chapter, and where they've come from, and what's going on with them, with every single book. And that's an interesting challenge for an author as well, is just to know and to work out as you're going along how much detail do they need and how much don't they need. Because the worst, I know as a reader, the last thing you want to do is feel like you've had to wade through book 1 every single time you go to the next book. So it's a matter of working out the placement of those details and how much, what do they need to know for this mystery. And if they want to know more details, they can go back and, you know, read the first one, sort of thing. But yeah, so there were a few key things that happened in book 1, which are definitely referenced, you know, in book 2, in such a way that you don't have to have read book 1 to have an understanding of what's going on.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, I think we're probably just about up for time now. So we might not have time for you to do your reading.
Oh, that's okay.
But people can access that
Read it yourself.
that excerpt online, as well as go out and get the book.
That's right.
So yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us today, and special thanks to Alison for being here to speak to us. It's been wonderful to hear about your writing processes and to learn some more about your new book. Copies of your new book, The Firestar, will be in our branches very soon for people to borrow or reserve, and we've got all your other titles available in our libraries to borrow as well. And so thanks so much for attending our author talk today. And if you have any feedback about today or our online events, please feel free to email us. You can email library@centralcoast.newsouthwales.gov.au. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you all around again sometime soon.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Alison.